sewing friends, welcome to my sewing room. My name is Beth and it's nice to be sewing with you today. Today I'm making a quilt block. It's a pretty big block. I'm calling it the most beautiful. You've probably heard the expression, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So you don't have to call it the most beautiful, but today I'm going to call it the most beautiful. And it is a variation of a classic block, a lily. So I'm calling my block Red Lilies, and I'm going to show you how to do it. Let's get started. Here is the quilt block. It's 16.5 inches square, quite a big one. So like I said, it doesn't take as many blocks to make a quilt. It incorporates some half square triangles and that vine that sort of crisscrosses. And what I did for my block is I chose a variety of reds and one green, and I will list down below all the sizes that you'll need to cut, and in just a minute I'll show you all the little groupings that I made as I cut out the pieces for this quilt block. For my block, I need 5 white squares or muslin that are 4.5 inches. I need 12 bars, I call them, that are 4.5 by 2.5. And then I need 8 squares that are 2.5 inches. And all of this, like I said, will be down below. From the green, I need a long strip with the fabric, which is longer than you need. That's 1.25 inch. And then I need 4 squares that are 3 inches. And I need 12 squares that are 2.5 inches. Now for the red, I chose 4 different reds. I'm going to just give you the total number. I need 4 squares that are 3 inches. Because of course you can do your reds all the same color. If you divide it up, you just kind of divide by 4 and you'll get what you need. I also needed some squares, some small squares, 16 2.5 inch squares. And then I need 4 of those bars that are 2.5 by 4.5, and that's all you need for this large quilt block. First thing I'm going to do is to make that vine that I'll be adding later on, and I gave myself a large stitch, a basting stitch. I folded that long vine in thirds, and I did a basting stitch all the way down the middle, making sure that both ends were sort of tucked in together, and this is the back side of my vine. This is the first element I'll be making for my quilt block. I'm taking a background 2.5 by 4.5 inch bar, and I'll be adding 2 squares, adding triangles to each end with a square. I'm going to draw a pencil line from corner to corner, and I will be sewing right on that pencil line. And after I give myself that first seam that I really need, I'm going to add a seam about 1/4 inch away, a little more than 1/4 inch away, and I will sew another seam for another half square triangle that I can use in another project. So this is kind of a no waste way of saving my fabric, kind of in a way of saving the fabric, and it'll be ready for another project. After getting that first corner triangle on there, I will add a second one, Again, just using a pencil and sewing along my pencil line and cutting off that excess half square triangle to use later. I need 2 of these little pieces for each of the flowers. There are 4 flowers, so I made 2 pieces from each of my different reds that I had here. Next element I need to make for my quilt block are half square triangles using those 3-inch squares, 1 green and 1 red. And if you are using all the same reds, you will not need to use 4 squares. You'll only need 2 squares of each. I needed to use 4 because I need 4 different half square triangles, 4 different reds. So I will have 4 half square triangles left over from this block that I can use in the next block. But like I said, you don't need 4 if you're using all the same fabric. And I drew a line, and I will sew on either side of that line. I'll cut it right down the middle on my pencil line. I'll press, and then I'll trim these little half square triangles to 2.5 inches, and I need 1 of each red for each of my flowers. We have one more element to make before we put our quilt block together. I'm taking those 4.5-inch squares, 4 of those squares, and I'll be adding 2.5-inch squares to 2 corners of that square to give me the leaves for my flowers. And again, I sewed from corner to corner. I then went right next to that first seam and added another seam, so I would have that leftover half square triangle for another project. So I've got 1 of my triangles on there. I'm going to add another one the same way, and I'll do that 4 times. So here are my flower leaves, here are my flower petals, and here are the half square triangles with a little bit of both. And now I need to lay out my quilt block. I'll use that white square that's left over and put that in the center. And then I will set the leaf blocks, those other 4.5-inch squares, all the way around that center square. As you can see, I'm adding those white bars next to the leaves, and then I'll start working on each of the flowers. At this point, you should have 4 green 2.5-inch squares left over, and I waited until this point so I could lay out my quilt block and I wouldn't get confused where to put them. So after I have everything laid out, I will add those squares in the appropriate corner, and hopefully I'll sew it on the right direction and everything will come together. So I really liked laying this out right next to my machine so I could kind of keep track of what I was doing and which direction to sew everything. As you can see, I'm just sewing those green squares onto one end of the red bar. I'm adding that extra seam so I can have that leftover half square triangle, and I'm again just going to lay everything out where I need it. I have one more thing I need to do before I sew this quilt block together. And here are my vines. This is the way I decided to do my vine. I'm sort of putting it into the seams on those top red flowers, and I'm going to wait to incorporate it onto the bottom 2 flowers. So as you'll see in a minute, I'm going to pin it in place, and then I'm going to sew those 3 pieces together so that I can just get the first step in getting this quilt block all put together. Now that I have my 2 vines attached to 2 of the flowers, I have enough pieces together so that I can begin sewing my quilt into rows. And I'll just try to keep that vine out of the way as I go along. When I got to this row right here, I realized I needed to put those 3 pieces together to make a square so that I could get that row together easily. Now that I have all the pieces sewn together in rows, I will put those rows together, and I'm going to pin that vine out of the way so that it doesn't accidentally get caught in a seam. And I'm going to show you in just a minute how I'm going to deal with the ends of that vine. Anybody figured out yet what I'm going to do, how I'm going to get that vine to be attached? Maybe you've done this before, I don't know. This is the way I do it, and it's probably not everybody's cup of tea, but first I'm going to get that vine to be the right length. I need it a little bit longer because it's actually going to be tucked into the seam. And the way that I do this is I go to where I sewed that seam together and I snip my threads. I just snip, I don't know, 2 or 3 threads, and I open that seam up and I tuck that vine in. I smooth it out and I tuck it in, and then I sew over that seam again. It really doesn't take very long, and it makes it so that the vine is just the right size for this quilt block. Now that my vine has been attached at both ends and everything is nice and smooth, I took some green thread and I top stitched along both sides of that vine. I tried to use a thread that would blend in. You could, of course, hand applique this vine on, but I think it looks fine to do some top stitching on a vine. And then my block will be complete. All that's left to do is to snip those basting threads, get them out of the way, and this quilt block, the most beautiful quilt block, is complete. I think it's beautiful, and I can't wait to have this beautiful red and green quilt on my bed. Thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.